Welcome to Journey Through the Gate, your paranormal portal podcast, as we delve into the many questions and wonders brought on by the supernatural experience. What's on the other side of the gate? Let's find out together.
Got it. That's right. I've got one of Britain's absolute best historians and ghost storytellers, Simon Entwistle. Come on in here, Simon.
It's great to be back again, Cisco. Thank you very much for having me on the show again.
Oh, absolutely. Anytime. Doors always open to gates, always open to you. Let's put it that way. I'm so... what am I going to ask Simon? If I asked him if he possibly might have a ghost story or two for us, do you think he might, listeners? Do you, Simon?
I certainly have. I've got a whole variety.
Oh, my goodness.
This has got shall I say, an American connection.
Okay.
I have a tour which takes place at a lovely hotel in Lancashire. It's a beautiful, beautiful building. And it's called the Duncan House. Listeners can actually look at it on the internet. But it was the home of a very, very wealthy family called the Duncan Houses. And way back in the 1700s, of course, wealthy families would employ their own staff. They'd have their own staff. They'd also have their own teachers. And the Duncan House family, they employed a very, very beautiful young lady called Lucette. She came from Paris. She was a governess, and she looked after the Duncan House children. In the summer of 1774, she arrived, and she settled in very well and looked after the children. Now, in 1775, in the winter period, they had a ball at the home. A gorgeous ball, and as each person entered the ballroom, they were given a glass of red wine. As the party started, a handsome British Army officer, a redcoat officer, arrived. He was a lieutenant in the Blues and Roars Household Cavalry, a very, very famous English infantry regiment. And as he walked inside the ballroom, he saw Lucette. It was love at first sight. As they glanced into each other's eyes, it was literally love at first sight. The lieutenant met her on quite a few occasions and then proposed to her. And her employers were, of course, happy to let her go. But as her husband was a serving officer, he was sent abroad, and he was sent to Boston, Massachusetts, in 1776. Of course, at that period of time, America wanted total independence from the United Kingdom. The War of Independence, of course, claimed many lives on many sides of the conflict, and the lieutenant disappeared. Of course, in those days, there were no telephones, no laptops. The only way you could communicate with people would be to actually send a letter. Now, soon after the lieutenant had left England, Lucette found to her delight she was carrying a child. Word filtered back from America that her husband had been killed at Concord. And she was deeply, deeply upset by this and received the letter on Christmas Eve, 1677. She made her way down to the River Calder, and she jumped into the cold water with child.
No.
As it happened, her husband had not been killed. He'd been captured and made a POW and was later released after the conflict. He came back to England 2 days after his wife had indeed taken her life. Now, it's only around the Christmas period at this beautiful building, the Duncan House, that their two ghosts have been seen in the ballroom and indeed the avenue of trees that take them down to the River Calder. A very, very touching and a very, very sad story. But continuing with this theme, I conduct guided tours at a very, very beautiful building called Samlesbury Hall. And again, listeners that can go on the internet and see this beautiful 1536 building, which is still standing beautifully. To this very day, weddings take place at Samlesbury Hall, and they have a chapel there. And nearly every Saturday, a wedding takes place. By far the most famous wedding ever to take place at Samlesbury Hall was of a young lad called John Creasap. John Creasap, again, like the lieutenant, was a serving British Army officer. His wedding in 1773 was very, very well received. He married a beautiful young lady called Gail Bradall. And being a serving army officer, he was sent overseas to Philadelphia, from Philadelphia to Boston, and from Boston to New England. And his wife absolutely loved New England. And she said, John, why don't you resign your commission and become a civilian? Great idea. I'm sick of the army, said John. So they started their own business and were doing very well. Their next door neighbours were doing extremely well. It seemed that America was the land of opportunity. However, one person recognised this more than anyone else, and that was good old King George back in England. And he thought, these people need taxing and taxing again. John said to his wife one day, I'm working my socks off, and all I'm doing is paying tax to England. He got very annoyed. His neighbours got annoyed. He then met a gentleman called George Washington. And George Washington's parents came from the county of Lancashire in England. And George recognised John's Northern English accent and had a conversation with him. John, I believe you served in the British Army. I would like to form a rebel army and throw the British administration out of North America. This country needs to be independent from England. Will you join me? I will join you, sir. And John Creasap became what's called a Pathfinder General in the rebel, we call the rebel forces in England. He was at Lexington, Concord, Bunker Hill, Ticonderoga, and the final surrender at Yorktown in 1781. Wow. And now the Brits had gone, John Creasap was summoned to see George Washington. John, I'd like to offer you a position in the new United States Armed Forces as a general. Will you take up this position? I will, sir. My mission for you, John, is now to encourage the Native Americans to leave New England, New Hampshire, New Jersey. Will you take up this position? Well, he did do. And I think it's fair to say that John Creasap had the blood of many an innocent squaw and many an innocent brave in his hands. But all good things come to an end, and he was captured by the Huron, North American Canadian Indians. And just like John Wayne in a famous Western movie, all his men were dispatched by the Indians, and he was tied to the totem pole and ordered to be given the death of 1,000 cuts. Oh, now, John Creasap was indeed a Yorkshireman, and Yorkshire folk are renowned for being very, very stubborn. In fact, Sir Ranulph Fiennes, that great British explorer, will take no one from Yorkshire on his expeditions because they like to whinge and complain about everything. Creasap was no different. He was tied to the totem pole and ordered to be given the death of 1,000 cuts, but he showed no emotion and was heard to say the words, "You'll get nowt from me." The Indians were so shocked by his bravery, he wasn't even scared about dying, and they became scared of him. They released his bonds. He rushed back into the forests and got back to Washington's headquarters. Sir, I've had enough of this, sir. I would like to return to my native Craven in West Yorkshire, back in England, sir. George Washington said there and then, John, my country is indebted to you. You will always be an American citizen. He got back to his native Yorkshire, a place called Craven, and died at the age of 74. He's buried at a place called New Pudsey Church, which is not too far from the city of Bradford in West Yorkshire. And his grave tablet very, very proudly says, General John Creasap, United States Armed Forces. And to this very day, the Pentagon are responsible for the grave. You could say that John Creasap was the all-American, all-Yorkshire hero. But very, very turbulent times, and in many ways, very, very sad times for two countries which are now bound together by not only a common language, but by democracy, which, of course, both countries love deeply.
Mm. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
That we've somehow now. I love that. I love having so many friends across the pond now, because I love that we've all kind of come together, And I think this too, going on right now, is actually bringing us together as well. It's a
I think so.
common thing we're all going through. That's amazing. And I've heard that story, and I'll tell you, as a Native American myself, Lenape and Cherokee, and death of 1,000 cuts is nothing to shake a finger at. That was an absolutely horrible torture, and for him to have that bravery. I've heard a lot of different stories about different Native American tribes actually taking somebody, acquiring them into the tribe because they showed bravery. That was the number one thing that would do it, which is where the gauntlet comes from. You guys have a gauntlet there, but we also had one in the Native Americans. I'm sure you've seen it, where they had to run down and everybody got to hit them. But that's part of it. You have to get up and go through it. And if you didn't go through it, you probably would die.
Yeah, I've often thought, Cisco, those early settlers must have been very, very tough people. I mean, there must have been really, really tough people, because to go to the New World, as we call it here in England, the pilgrims, a new world, very, very brave people, very brave.
And now that you mention that, Simon, something comes up to my mind, something we're going through right now. When they came over here, they didn't realize they were carrying that invisible enemy with them. They were bringing smallpox and the common cold and things like that Native Americans were just not built up their immunity to, and took out quite a few, tribes, of just wiped them out completely with their smallpox and things like that. So even then, I mean, again, that shows how fragile we are. I mean, we know so much, we've got so much technology, and here it is, just this little germ causing all this harangue right now. It's amazing.
Amazing. It is. It really is amazing.
It is. It's something else. But it's a beautiful story, and I can't believe he got away and then he went right back to where he started from. I've had enough of this new world.
Well, I think Yorkshire folk. Yorkshire, of course, it's a very, very famous county, a state, if you will, in the north of England, and way back in the Olympic Games, had Yorkshire been an independent country, I think they'd have come about ninth in the medal tables of the world, the Olympic gold medals. They were quite an amazing county, really, a very resourceful people, really.
Just tough and, not giving up. And that is amazing. I mean, you can't really say that out of each country has their story of that kind of bravery and stick-to-itiveness, because I think if we didn't, it wouldn't be here anymore. I mean, I have that too with my last name being Murdoch. And I don't know if you've ever done your ancestry, but I looked back at that, and I have a little bit of Scottish, mostly Native American, but I have a little bit of Scottish. That's where the name comes from.
Yes.
And I was telling somebody the other day that, there was only so many colonies in Scotland that, so many families that survived. You had to be tough to get through the winters and the famines and everything else. So I think we all can look back on our ancestors and give them a hat tip, because if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be here.
Very, very true. Very true.
It's amazing. Wonderful. Now, I know you have other stories, and you tell anyone you want. What is your... you have so many fascinating stories. I know we've done the Pendle Witches, which has just been a favorite among the listeners. Of course, Jack the Ripper and your haunted pub stories and all those that you've come to tell. But you just tell me whatever ones you want, because you know the stories, and amazing. The history and everything else is just, the way you paint a story is gorgeous. So the brush is yours, my friend.
Thank you very much, Cisco. This is the sort of story which is really, I'm told, about 44 million to 1 against. It is a ghost story. It's a haunting story, but one that I absolutely cherish, Cisco. And we're going to turn the clock back now to 1960, when I was just 5 years old. My father bought a beautiful, beautiful Victorian house in a county called Cumbria, which is right at the very, very top of the northwest of England. And I remember climbing the removal vehicle, which was full of tea chests, full of clothes and cutlery, with my mum, dad, brother and sister. And we drove to this gorgeous location, Cumbria, very near the Scottish border. And I remember leaving the vehicle and looking at this beautiful 3-story house and the gardens surrounding it. And I thought, how fortunate and how lucky am I to actually live here. I grew to love the house very much indeed, but I almost felt as if the house was actually talking to me. And it certainly talked to my mum and dad the very, very first night we arrived. It was December 1960. And because I was only 5 years old, my brother was 8 years old, my sister about 2, Mum and Dad made our beds up very, very, very quickly. And we fell into a deep sleep, as young children do, of course. Mum and Dad carried on until about 1 o'clock in the morning, unloading tea chests, unloading crockery and cutlery. Because the house was a country house, there were no neighbours. And Mum and Dad thought, well, the last job we need to do is to put up any curtains. Mum and Dad made up their bed and they climbed in after the long journey. And my father turned over in bed and noticed that bright, bright moonlight was actually emanating through the window and illuminating the whole room. It was almost like daylight, if you will, a lovely silver moon. He then heard the sounds of very, very tiny footsteps. The door of the bedroom slowly opened, and in came a liver and white Cocker Spaniel dog. The dog came into the bedroom, sat in the corner of the room, and my father heard its tail actually wagging against the carpet. His first thoughts were, oh no, I've left the door open. Downstairs this dog has got into the house somehow. He got out of bed and walked towards the dog that was sitting in the corner of the bedroom. The dog seemed to turn to look at the window, almost as if its name was being called. My father reached for the collar of the dog, and to his horror, his hand went straight through it. He swallowed deeply. His heart accelerated. He made a second attempt, and his hand went through the dog again. The dog then turned and completely vanished. At the same time, my mother was in a deep, deep sleep, and she woke up with a jolt to see my father sitting at the end of the bed. What's wrong? She said. My father said, well, I've just seen this dog. I've made 2 attempts to touch it, but my hand's gone through it. My mother said, I've just had a most unusual dream. It was crystal clear. I dreamt there was a man outside our house pointing up at our bedroom window with a dog lead in his hand. He was wearing Victorian clothing. They then put 2 and 2 together. My mum and dad never told me this story until I was about 15 years old. I spent 10 very, very happy years in that house. I grew to love it. Each room felt quite different, and it was almost as if the building wanted to talk to you. But it was not an evil feeling. It was a very warm feeling. When my father sold the house in 1971, it absolutely broke my heart. We moved from there to what we call a bungalow, a building about 5 times smaller because my mother had had a heart attack and she couldn't climb the 3-story stairs that that house actually had. However, this is where the story takes a very, very sinister twist. 3 years ago, my wife and I went on a Mediterranean cruise on a beautiful cruise ship. Thoroughly enjoyed it. We went to Gibraltar, went to Malaga, went to Italy, went to Sardinia, went to Cairo. It was absolutely fantastic. On this ship, there must have been about 5,000 guests. And you had what's called a black tie event, where you would go down to the restaurants and you had to wear a black tie. And one of these events, I was sitting down enjoying a meal, and 2 tables down from where I was sitting was a very, very attractive young lady that kept looking at me. And I thought, I really cannot be that good looking. As it happened, she came across and she said, "It's Simon, isn't it?" I said, "Yes, that's right." She said, "I come from the village of Chapman, not too far from where you live." "Oh, yes, of course," I said. "I know the area very well." She said, "Simon, I have been on your guided tours and I quite like them." She said, "Have you ever thought about applying for a job on the cruise ships as a lecturer to do a PowerPoint show on stories?" And I said, "Well, would people like ghostly tales?" Louise, that was her name. She said, "Well, Simon, I think they might do." So she gave me an email address for the firm that operated the cruise ships, and I got back to England and I typed in the name and I applied. Within 4 days, I got a response from the cruise directors, and they said, "Would you like to audition in Sussex or Cumbria?" Now, Sussex is a county in the deep south of England. Cumbria, of course, is where I used to live. And I said, "Oh, no, I'll go to Cumbria." So I was given a telephone number, and I telephoned a lady called Maureen, and she said, "Simon, please bring your laptop. I have a projector and I have a screen, and bring all your stories, and then I shall audition you. I will give you a sat-nav code for my home." She gave me the sat-nav code, and I put it into my car and set off. I found myself driving towards the city of Lancaster, a beautiful city which I knew quite well. And from Lancaster, I found myself driving right up to Cumbria, which, of course, I knew again very well. But I found myself going past very, very familiar roads. I went past my old primary school. I went past my old secondary modern school. And then I went down this long, long, gorgeous country lane, which I knew very well from my childhood, and found to my amazement that the sat-nav told me to turn left. I turned left down the driveway, which I knew very well, and straight back to the house which my father sold in 1971 because the cruise director, Maureen, had bought that house only 8 years ago. I stopped outside. I looked up at the familiar, beautiful Victorian building, and I knocked on the door. There was Maureen. "Right, Simon, we've got 5 hours of work to cover here." She said, "You look a bit jaded. What's the problem?" I said, "Well, Maureen, I know you won't believe this, but I used to live here." "No," she said. "I did." I said, "I used to live here. I can show you some pictures on my laptop of my childhood." I showed her the photographs of my old primary school and indeed the house, indeed the very room we were sitting in. She was quite shocked. She said, "Well, Simon, I'll make a cup of tea." She made a cup of tea. She then came back to the sitting room where I was sitting, and I told her about my father's experience of the ghostly dog in the bedroom. As I told the story, the teacup slipped through her fingers and smashed at her feet. She said, "Simon, my brother lives in the city of London. Every Christmas, he comes up from London to stay with me and my husband. The very, very first night he stayed here, Christmas Eve 2012, he was in bed. The door slowly opened in the early hours of the morning, and in came a liver and white Cocker Spaniel. Whoa. I looked up at the ceiling and said, "Dad, thank you." And Maureen was quite shocked as well when I told this story, but I can assure you and all the listeners, as the good Lord is my witness, it is 100% true. It really is true. And as it happens, I do use that story because Maureen, the cruise director, she did audition me again 5 weeks later because I couldn't do it that day. I was just too shocked. The next visit was really, really happy. And she got me some work on the cruise ships, which was quite nice, really.
Wonderful. My goodness. So that man, I wonder what the story could be behind that. I mean, the gentleman in Victorian dress had the lead, and he was looking for his dog. And the dog just keeps coming through the door like that. I wonder what the story is behind that, you know.
I do believe, Siska, there's certain people can see things. My dad was quite sensitive, and perhaps Maureen's brother could have been sensitive. I would be a liar to tell you I've seen a ghost because I haven't. But I do meet, in my business as a tour guide, I do come across quite a few psychics and mediums, and you can always tell when someone's being very honest and very, very truthful. And my dad would not lie about anything. He really wouldn't.
Absolutely. And I always find, I think what you're saying is absolutely true. We often talk on this show about, I have had experiences in a room with several people, and, maybe one or two saw it and the others did not. Or someone will have a lot of experiences in a home, and then another family moves in and they have no experiences. And then they move out, and then the next family moves in and they have experiences. So we often wonder what that is about people who have that, whether it's a sensitivity or if it's a certain energy that they're able to click into. You have one there. I don't know if you've ever heard of the, I'm sure you have, the Borley.
Borley Rectory.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's one family to the next, that have those experiences there,
Very, very much so. That's a great story. The Borley Rectory in Sussex, in the county of Sussex. That's got ghostly coaches and things, really. Yeah. But it's certainly a fascinating place to visit. It really, really is. But I personally have not seen anything there. I didn't feel any bad vibes. But again, I'm not a medium. I'm not a psychic, so I can't really tune in. But I do have another gripping story for you, which
Absolutely.
is quite similar, really. In England, of course, we have these beautiful, beautiful halls and residences. They're all what we call Grade 1 listed buildings, which means they're protected by law. One hall I'm regularly invited to is the home of the Parker family. The Parker family have lived at Brusham Hall since 1507, when the building was first built. The family just absolutely love collecting items, interesting items, really. And when I first went to the hall and was given a guided tour by Mr. Parker, who was really training me up for the job, really, he brought out what looked like part of an old aircraft. And he said, "Sam, what's this?" I said, "Well, it looks a bit like the ribbing of an aircraft." He said, "Well, you're not too far wrong. It's actually part of a German Zeppelin, the L-31. I went home and I read about this story, and it really was quite gripping. It does have a ghostly encounter at the end of the story, Cisco. But we're going to turn the clock back now to World War One. Now, our German cousins are extremely good at inventing, dare I say it, terror weapons. They seem to be always on the ball when it comes to military technology. And they invented a most amazing vessel called the Zeppelin, which is an airship. Now, the L-31 was run by the German Naval Service, and its officer was called Hauptmann Matte, Captain Hauptmann Matte. And he would fly over London at extreme height, and he could bomb London at his will. He was causing millions and millions of pounds of damage. Now, the artillery on the ground hadn't got the technology to actually hit him because he was just too high. Now, the British, a bit like the Germans, are very, very good at trying to solve problems. And they brought out a new aircraft called the SE-5, the SE-5 fighter. And they also realised that if they closed in on the Zeppelin, a normal bullet would just go through it because the helium would almost be a bit pneumatic, if you will. It wouldn't really cause any damage. So therefore, the laboratories in England worked out a new bullet called the incendiary round, which was basically a bullet that was on fire. On the 17th of October, 1916, Hauptmann Matte took off from Wilhelmshaven in Germany straight towards London. He had actually written to, of all people, the New York Post and told the New York Post readers, "I can bomb London at my will. They can't even touch me." However, this night, the Royal Air Force, with this new aircraft, were ready for him. 20-year-old Jonathan Tempest took off from Barnet North London, an aerodrome at North London, and it took him 1 hour to get to the height of the Zeppelin in pretty freezing cold conditions. He had leather gauntlets on, a leather jacket, a leather helmet, and conditions in the aircraft, which was an open cockpit, must have been exceptionally cold. However, he closed in on the L-31 Zeppelin. He could see the German crew in the gondola beneath it, making rather rude two-fingered gestures at him. He closed in at the Zeppelin's side, and when the crosswires of his machine guns crossed the Zeppelin, he opened fire, sending these incendiary rounds directly at the Zeppelin. To his delight, he saw a golden glow inside the Zeppelin, and to his horror, he saw the Zeppelin crashing towards Earth, belching smoke and flames. But to his horror, he saw the entire German crew jump to their deaths above what we call Temple Bar in London. They landed in the city of London itself. Of course, they were all killed on the impact. But as the Zeppelin came down, in the city of London that night was a chap called Thomas Lister Parker. He rushed to the crash site and saw buildings on fire where the Zeppelin had come down. But with his umbrella, he hooked a piece of the wreckage away and took his coat off and wrapped it in his coat, got on the first train back to the north of England, and displayed the Zeppelin actually at the hall. However, some unusual things started to happen over the years. German voices were heard downstairs at night time in the hall, and parts of the Zeppelin itself were found in different parts of the room downstairs. They couldn't work out what was happening because the building was locked, but they found that Zeppelin wreckage would find itself all over the house as if picked up by an invisible hand. What I can tell you is in World War One, the British were very, very chivalrous, really, and the entire German crew were taken to a cemetery outside Temple Bar, where they were given full military funerals. And after World War One, the German families came over to England to put flowers on the graves of these German air crews. But it's amazing how technology did in fact stop the Zeppelins from ever coming to England ever again. And today in modern warfare, the incendiary round is still used to this very, very day.
My goodness. Oh. And just to show again how close we are in our lives and how they touch each other, we're not as far apart as we think. I live exactly 6 miles from where the Hindenburg went down.
Oh, gosh, yes.
In Lakehurst, New Jersey. Is that not amazing? And I can remember my mom telling me stories of how they heard it then on the radio and went down to see the aftermath of the whole thing. But my goodness, yeah, they're very scary. They were wonderful technology, and I think they had a lot going for them. But the fact that they were so flammable is just, it just scares me so much, you know. But yeah, that thing went down pretty quick, and it went up like a tinderbox, as they would say.
Yes, yeah. I've seen the film footage. It's pretty horrible, isn't it? Really, pretty horrible to watch. Really,
yeah.
Quite disturbing, really.
Absolutely. I can't imagine being on that and coming down, and of course you're surrounded by all that gas. And I know there's a lot of controversy about it, how it started and what happened. But you know, when you're on something like that and it's going down, you don't care how it started. You just want to get away from it. And it's very hard to get away from, because even if they made it to the ground and they were running it, they're so huge that fire was falling on them. And I think that was just, you know, the famous radio thing, Oh, the Humanity.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty horrible. Man, I tell you what, I know you have another engagement to go to, and before I let you go or I get you started on something else, I want you to tell the listeners where to find you right now. You do the Top Hat tours, of course, and I know you have your YouTube channel, and all of that is going to be in our description below this video, so they can connect in and get right to you. You have Ghostly Tales of the Unexpected, the book. What else do you have going on, Simon, and where can we find you?
Right. Well, you've got my website, which is www.tophattours.co.uk. Also, YouTube, I've got Ghostly Tales from the Grave.
Mm-hmm.
I do have a book out called Ghostly Tales of the Unexpected. And I'm working on a second book right now, Cisco, because I've got so much time in my hands.
Oh, bless
It's
you.
nice. It's nice to actually concentrate on the second book, which I am doing. But I've just taken part in a television pilot called Haunted Rooms, and that's just gone to the commissioners as we speak, actually. But the whole idea is to choose a very, very historical building in England, Wales, Scotland, or Ireland. And, of course, I would look at the history of these lovely buildings and then bring in mediums, different mediums for each episode, and see what they can pick up from each haunted room. And we did the pilot show, and I was very, very impressed with a lady called Maddie Mitch, and she came from the beautiful Isle of Man, which is in between England and Northern Ireland. And she picked up everything quite beautifully. So it's a bit like a game show, if you will. Each medium is given points for their accuracy of describing what they picked up. It's a great idea, and I'm really hoping that will take off. Of course, it's all up to the commissioners,
Right.
whether they like it or not. Then they'll commission it. And the producer Jason seemed to be quite impressed with the work that I put into the actual stories behind each building, really.
That's amazing. What a great idea for a show. Now, each medium, it's almost like a game show, you said. I
Very much so.
hesitate to ask you what the prize would be. Did they get their very own ghost if they win?
What they were hoping to do, actually, Cisco, is each winner would go to like a super round where
Nice.
we'd have like 6 mediums and probably a good 1.5 hour show, so
Wow.
that they'd all get a good 10 minutes each to work out what they could pick up, really.
I think it's wonderful. I think it's wonderful, Simon. Here in the States, I know it's different, where you are. I don't know what your shows are like there, but I have a lot of friends tell me that the ones in America are just, because, there's so much. I think when they started it, Simon, they took out all of the feeling and the heart kind of and wanted to just go science and tech. Now we're starting to get back to science and tech plus the feeling, plus the people with sensitivities like mediums and psychics and people with abilities. And I think it's wonderful. It's all coming back together now because truly, like Hans Holzer said, ghosts, I'm not afraid of ghosts. They're just people who in need of help. And if we're going to help them as well as find out about them, I think it's great that we're putting the heart back in it. I think it's wonderful what you're doing.
Well, it was a very, very enjoyable slot, that really. But what was quite nice is that when these 3 mediums arrived at this beautiful building where we did the pilots, they didn't know where they were going to. Mm-hmm. Their mobile phones were taken off them, and they were all met at the railway station by taxi and then brought to the venue. And each one was then taken to the same room and then filmed as to what they could pick up. I would then look at the film and say, well, yes, she's quite right about the Victorians being there. She's quite right about a murder that took place there. And some people do have skills. They really, really do. And I was very impressed. My wife's my biggest critic, and she saw the pilot, and she said, Simon, that's probably the best work you've ever done, really, because it was really genuine. It was really true.
Well, you just have to come back on when it gets, because we're going to just stay positive, and it's going to be taken by the commission, and it's going to be on, and it's going to be a hit, and we'd love to have you back to tell us more about it, my love.
Thank you, Cisco.
I'm so glad you stopped in today, and please take care. Give our best to your wife and everybody, in your care. We're going to get through this. We're going to get through this globally, not just as separate nations, but we'll get through this. And as you guys always say, keep calm and drink tea.
Oh, gosh. Well, there's plenty of tea around here. Plenty of tea. Yes.
Thank you so, so much, Simon. I know you have to go, and I'm just so glad you got to stop in for time with us today. You be well.
Thank you, Cisco. Thank you, Cisco. Great pleasure to talk to you again. Thank you.
Absolutely, love. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much to Simon Entwistle for coming on today. He's such a busy man these days. It's amazing. He went from having everything canceled because, of course, the lockdown and the quarantines, and now he's very busy working on a microphone, and it's absolutely amazing if you think about it, what you can do when you reach out. So we're very glad he had time to stop in today. However, I was thinking, talking to Simon, he made me think of the Borley Rectory, and I know in my first episode, it's called Truly Ghostly, I did speak about the Borley Rectory, and I believe I brought that story in to talk a little bit about not only residual hauntings, that Borley Rectory had so much going on. I wanted to tell you a little bit about it. I know some of you know an awful lot about it, and some maybe never heard of it before. So I wanted to tell you. Basically, it's reputed to be the most haunted house in the UK. Now, that's really saying something, because if you think about the history, there's so many hauntings going on the grounds and in castles that are still standing to today, haunted pubs and all kinds of just regular homes that are still, you have to think about it, history. When you go into the UK and Britain, and you say, well, I live in a historic house. Well, they could be saying, it's been standing since the 1500s or the 1300s. It's amazing. We're here in America. We look back and we think, oh gosh, I've got a 150-year-old house or maybe a 200-year-old house. It's really saying something. So it seems like a difference. And we often talk about, well, the land was still here, and we have an awful lot of battlefield and Native American massacres, that's happened, and now we've got these big highways going across, and the history's still here. It's just that the buildings aren't as old as they are, of course, in the UK. So the rectory was built by the Reverend Henry D.E. Bull in 1863. Now that's the rectory, all right? But it says that the history goes way back to 1362, when Benedictine monks built a monastery on the site, which would later hold the rectory. And legend told of a nun from the Burrs convent, 7 miles southeast of the Borley, and she fell in love with a monk from the monastery. They had decided to elope to be together, but the elders discovered their plans, and a friend of a monk was to drive the carriage to help them escape. On the fateful night, they were captured by the elders. The coachman was beheaded, the monk hanged, and the nun was bricked up alive in the walls of the vaults beneath the rectory. Their ghosts have haunted the site forever, ever since. Now, I've got a lot to say about that one, but I don't understand how people, to be that cruel to people, and be standing there and saying that you're doing the right thing, as a religion, and that always bothers me. But anyway, it seems like literally overkill to me, but there you go. Since then, they've always had something going on in the rectory. The nun is seen walking through the gardens toward where the lake is. Monks are seen walking through the halls. Also, the phantom coach has been seen going down the hallway and also coming through the gates. That one always got me too, because you think, well, coming down the hallway, well, did that used to be a road, or is this also, is it a residual, or is it reoccurrence of the night because there was so much emotion? Obviously, the nun is still wandering and looking for forgiveness, or looking for her loved one, the monk that she loved. I don't know, but it's sad to me to seem that they couldn't have gotten together. Let's hope they have since then. But every family that moved in there, obviously into the rectory, would have a different experience, from things moving to things breaking and flying around, of course the coach, and seeing different things, and eventually Harry Price bought it, and went in to take. He was a lot of people say the first ghost hunter, the first one that used the name ghost hunter. And that was in, let's see, I believe the 30s, 1930s. I could be wrong on that. But anyway, he did an awful lot of studies in there, and it was quite an amazing thing. If you ever get a chance, look it up. And basically, Harry Price said it was the most extraordinary and best documented case of haunting in the annals of physical research by Harry Price. And he took a lot of students in there from the college and had them. There's all kinds of things on automatic writing. They did all kinds of what he considered experiments in there. Look into that and see what you think, because the Borley Rectory, the pictures are amazing. The personal accounts are amazing. And it's just always made me so sad, because I just don't understand why they couldn't just let them go off and be together. I mean, what were they hurting? You know what I mean? For Pete's sake. So there's that. I don't think she deserved to be walled up, bricked up into a wall to die like that. It's just crazy. And, quite honestly, if somebody did that to me, you're darn right, I'm coming back and haunt you too. But she let them off a little easy, because I'd be a little bit more, I think I'd be a little more physical. Yeah, but you had a lot of years to learn, right? So there's always such a sad story behind usually a haunting. I wonder so much about the one Simon told us with the little dog, and the man that was looking for the dog and had the lead in his hand, and the dog was coming into the room and opened the door time and time again. That's an amazing thing, that over all those years, two people saw it that Simon got to meet. What an interesting thing. You almost wonder if there wasn't a spirit hand in there just to let him know that that was a true story his dad told him. Quite amazing. It's always wonderful when Simon stops in. Don't forget to look him up on the sites that he mentioned. Also, everything is going to be in the show notes. Look in there. He's also doing a radio show right now. I believe it's live. I don't think it's recorded, but you can check in on that on BBC Radio, and there's a link you can go to and you can listen to it live when he's on, because he's always telling fantastic stories. So I'll try to get that link for you too and see what I can do. Tonight, I have a special treat for you. I have on with me tonight one of the most requested return guests from all my listeners. His last show was so popular, it went through the roof, and people just cried for more. So we got you more. Tonight, I have back the author of Ghostly Tales of the Unexpected. And a fantastic book. I highly recommend it. You're just going to love it. We got Halloween season coming up, and I can't think of a better thing to get for yourself or a friend. And he is an award-winning tour guide at Top Hat Tours. So light your lanterns and get ready for the walk and tour of your life to get through all the ghostly tales. I have back with me Mr. Simon Entwistle. Welcome back, Simon.
The pleasure's all mine, Cisco. It's really nice to be back on the show again.
Well, we're so glad to have you. Last one, when you were talking about Jack the Ripper and the Pendle Witches and a couple of the haunted pubs, everybody just absolutely loved it. So we are doing here an extended Halloween season because I never think that one day is enough. Do you?
No, there's plenty of stories out there.
Right. So we have decided to just go ahead and extend it for 2 months, and we are doing nothing but wall-to-wall ghosts and haunted houses, and you are opening the door to that entire spooktacular season. So thank you so much for coming back.
My pleasure.
Terrific. How is it there where you are tonight? Now it's nighttime where you are now.
Yes, it's been dark now for about an hour.
Mm-hmm.
We had a truly lovely summer, but I think now the autumn is just showing signs on the trees. They're just starting to show signs of the leaves turning different colours, and dare I say it, winter is on the horizon.
It seems to be happening faster and faster. Here on the East Coast in the United States, we are just getting a little taste of chill in the air. And, it's fine with me. I love the summer, but I'll tell you, I love the fall. And one of the number one reasons I love it is everybody seems to turn, their hearts and minds to those ghostly stories and spooks on the wind. And that's just our kind of place, isn't it, Simon?
Very much so. Very much so.
Wonderful. Now, have you added any more different ghost tours to your schedule? Is so busy, and I know the Pendle Witches was huge for you this year, and of course the Jack the Ripper tour is always very, very popular. And I've just noticed, following you on Facebook and watching you just as a friend, that you're just all over. You've got the big bus tours now and everything.
Yes, really, really busy with the what we call them coach tours, really.
Mm-hmm.
And they go all over the north of England. And of course, it's my job to talk about landscapes and indeed famous characters that live there.
Uh-huh.
And I would like to start with the town of Blackburn in the north of England. Now, Blackburn used to be a very, very big textile town, really. Way back in the 1800s, the people of Blackburn used to boast, "Let's clothe Great Britain before breakfast and the rest of the world afterwards." Of course, all the cotton came from Louisiana and Mississippi and indeed Egypt, and then was sold to the world's markets by the city of Liverpool. Blackburn became quite wealthy, and we're now going to turn the clock back in time to 1907, and a beautiful theatre in the town of Blackburn called Trevanian's Amphitheatre. Many, many famous stars have performed on the amphitheatre, including the great Charlie Chaplin, Ted Ray, Tessie O'Shea, and some very, very famous British music, shall we say, actors and entertainers. Now, the theatre was very, very busy, but towards 1955, the theatre was suffering an awful lot because of an invention called the television set, and a gentleman called Mr. William John Murray, he bought the old theatre. He wanted to bring back the audiences again, and he wanted to bring back the music hall, etc. But he was competing against this brand new piece of equipment called the television set. Towards the end of 1959, he sadly accepted the fact that no one wanted to go to the theatre anymore. They just wanted to buy the television and sit in their own front rooms and watch the TV programmes. He put on the very, very last show, which was called A Farewell to Blackburn. As the curtains closed for the last time, he very, very sadly made his way to the green room, sat down and brought out a 45 service Colt revolver. He loaded the chamber, placed the barrel to his temple, and sadly pulled the trigger. For 3 long years, the old theatre was laid empty. Vagrants broke in. There were stories of 3 fires there, and stories of strange goings-on, like the curtains closing the stage by themselves, and strange tapping on the sound of the central heating pipes. Now, the General Post Office, they took a shine to the old building. They thought, let's buy it. Now, the Post Office, they bought the building not to use it, but to knock it down and build a brand new telephone exchange building on that very, very site. Now, in the early 1960s, the telephone exchange building had what's called switchboard operators, and they would put headsets on. They'd have what's called a jack plug, and they'd place the plug into the socket to divert calls all around the town of Blackburn. When the building opened, they employed daytime switchboard operators and nighttime switchboard operators, and this story comes courtesy of 3 of those nighttime switchboard operators: Mr. George Greer, Jeff Hutchinson, and Tom Cotton. They arrived for their very, very first night shift, and they sat down in front of their consoles, put their headsets on, and they thought, what a great job. A really new building. The paint was still fresh. All the equipment was brand new. And towards 3 o'clock in the morning, the calls started to fade away, as most of the people were fast asleep in the city of Blackburn. Jeff said, would you like a cup of tea, boys? Yes, said Bert and Greer. He got a tray, and he made his way to the very, very end of the building, where Jeff could see him walk down towards the end of the kitchen. There he put the kettle on, and his 2 colleagues could see him through the plate glass windows for some distance away. But Jeff was standing still. Now, Jeff wore a heavy brogue shoe with a metal toe cap and a metal heel plate, and as he walked, you could actually hear the sounds of his footsteps. However, he'd stopped to make the tea, and his 2 colleagues, Bert and Tom, could still see him standing still, but they could also hear the sounds of footsteps. As Jeff was making the tea, he felt he was being watched. He placed the milk on the tray, the sugar on the tray, the teapot on the tray, and put 3 cups and saucers on the tray, and slowly walked back to his colleagues. And they all looked a bit sheepish. Jeff said to Bert and Tom, what's wrong, boys? Well, Jeff, when you were making the tea, we saw you standing still, but we could also hear the sounds of your footsteps. That's strange, said Jeff. I felt I was being watched. All of a sudden, they heard the sound of a grand piano playing, and all the blinds in the building came up and came down, and the 3 of them watched as the blinds went up and down by themselves. They checked all 7 floors. The sound of the piano didn't get any louder, but didn't get any quieter either. Now, this didn't happen every night, but at least once a month. However, in Christmas 1972, all 3 of them went to work for the night shift. They were sat down in front of their consoles. They were diverting calls. And towards 4 o'clock in the morning, the building became very, very quiet, and the calls faded away. They then heard the sounds of laughing coming from downstairs, and something very, very strange happened. The lift worked from the bottom floor up to the top floor where all 3 men worked. Jeff was a bit more brave than the other 3. He knew the building was locked and knew there was only 3 people in the building. As the lift doors opened, Jeff was there with his umbrella, ready to pounce on his victim. But as the doors opened, there was absolutely no one there. They then heard laughing coming from downstairs. All 3 of them got in the lift, went down to the bottom floor, and as the doors opened, they saw a Christmas tree shaking wildly. All the baubles fell off the Christmas tree, and then the tree bent back and flipped back with a almost like a thud. Well, the 3 of them looked at each other, went back upstairs, and they reported what had happened to their manager the following day. And word got around the town of Blackburn that something very, very strange had taken place. Now, the building is haunted, and a gentleman called Mr. Bob Dobson, he actually did some research into the history of the building, and they believe the ghost is none other than Mr. William John Murray, who loved that building so much he couldn't bear to leave it. I did some research myself, and I talked to one of the ladies who cleans the building at night time, and she remembered some 4 years ago she was working on the top floor, just cleaning the floor with a hoover, and she heard the doors of the lift open behind her, and she just glanced and just caught the back of a man wearing a white polo neck sweater, corduroy pants, and some heavy brown brogue shoes. She was shown a picture of Mr. Murray, and Mr. Murray was wearing exactly the same clothing. The people of Blackburn are quite known for their humour, and they call this ghost the Telly Ghost. Who else could it be but Mr. William J. Murray, who loved that building so much he couldn't bear to leave it.
Wow. That is amazing, Simon. I find that there's so many ghost stories surrounded around lifts and elevators, and I can't imagine being on an elevator and having that door open and not knowing what's on the other side. And then to see a Christmas tree with all the baubles coming off and then pulled back and let go. Wow. That would scare me. I don't know if I'd go back up the elevator or if I'd take the stairs and get out. Whoa.
I think perhaps, Cisco, the three of them, because they were together,
right?
They must have relied on each other. But it's a very true story, and they call it the teleghost, after the telephone exchange building. But not too far from there is a street called Darwin Street. And on the side of the street is one of these big blue plaques. It's what we call a tourism plaque to commemorate an event. And it says on the plaque, here, on the 15th of August, 1842, plug drawing riots took place. Now, as I explained at the start of our conversation, Cisco, Blackburn was a big textile town. Now, the county of Lancashire is in the north of England, and Blackburn particular, along with its sister towns, gets a lot of rain. Now, cotton likes a damp environment. As a result, Lancashire was chosen for the textile weaving industry. Now, the textile workers never, ever had it easy. And in 1842, there was a huge problem. First of all, steam-driven equipment was being installed in all the factories. They didn't need as many textile workers. And the wages were terrible. In fact, the textile workers, all they could afford to eat was potatoes. Potatoes for breakfast, potatoes for dinner, and potatoes for evening meal. 5 local lads decided to do something about it. They met in an old inn, which is long since gone, on Darwin Street, Blackburn, called the Unicorn. They sat round the table with a flagon of ale in front of them. Mr. Robert Hartley, William Proctor, John Rawlinson, William Walmsley, and Ratcliffe Ingham. 5 very brave lads. They said, right, we need to do something about our situations. We need to get the whole of the Blackburn textile industry out on strike and force the textile barons, the people that own these huge factories, to pay us decent wages. They decided to start their plans on the 15th of August, 1842, at exactly 4:30. The whole idea was to break into the factory, go to the boiler room, pull the plug out of the boiler to extinguish the flames and stop production. The first factory was called Rogerton Brearley on Darwin Street. Our 5 local lads broke into the factory, they pulled the plug out of the boiler room, and of course the steam engine stopped working, and all the textile workers applauded them, and they joined them, and they went to the next factory, and then the next factory. However, as they came round the corner, they saw a thin red line of British infantry, soldiers from the local barracks. They had no idea, but whilst they'd been discussing their plans, someone had pretended to be on their side. That person had run down Darwin Street straight to the local police commissioner Shepherd, and Police Commissioner Shepherd had contacted the local magistrate, Mr. Hindle, and Mr. Hindle had galloped at great speed in his white horse to the local barracks. In the barracks was a platoon of Scottish infantry, the famous Black Watch infantry regiment, which is still with the British Army to this very day. They wore red jackets, a red coat, and a kilt, and these men were fully armed and waiting outside what we call the Dandy Textile Factory. As the textile workers went rushing towards them, in front of them was Mr. Hindle on his white horse. Our sovereign lady the Queen chargeth and commandeth that persons assembled are to disperse peaceably to their habitats and lawful businesses. Failure to comply with this order, resulting in tumultuous and righteous behaviour, will be done accordingly. God save the Queen. The infantry opened fire, and 27 people fell to the floor as dead as doornails. The Scottish infantry then reloaded their muskets, but Ratcliffe Ingham rushed forward, jumped up, and grabbed the collar of the local magistrate and dragged him off his horse and gave Mr. Hindle a good hiding on the side of the pavement before 4 Scottish infantrymen knocked him unconscious and dragged him to the side of the pavement. Mr. William Proctor went down in history that night. He disarmed a Scottish soldier. He turned the musket round with the bayonet facing a Scottish soldier and shouted, "You fire that musket and I will run you through. You take my life, I will take yours too. A fair day's pay for a fair day's work," before he too was knocked unconscious to the floor. At the end of that terrible day, 47 people lay dead on Darwin Street, and our 5 local men were all arrested and brought in front of the magistrates. There they were told by the magistrate they would be sentenced to death by hanging. They showed no emotion whatsoever, and this really upset the magistrates. So therefore the magistrate said, well, let's commute the death sentence and have them all deported to Australia. When they got to Australia, they were in a terrible state of health, weighing probably 5 or 6 stone, and all of them were worked to death. They never saw Blackburn ever again. The textile workers were forced to pay for all the damage they had done that day, and they never ever had it very, very easy. The wages still continued to be very, very poor. However, one country recognised this more than anyone else, the United States of America. They thought, we're sending all our cotton to Lancashire from Louisiana and Mississippi. Why don't we actually start to weave ourselves? We should be sending all this to England. And they said, well, there's just one problem. We don't know really how to weave as well as the Lancashire textile workers do. So in 1902, a delegation arrived in Blackburn, in Burnley, in Nelson, in Cone, in Manchester, Preston, and Clitheroe. And this American delegation waited for the workers to come out, and they said, look, we can offer you 5 times as much as you're earning here in England. We'll pay for your trip across the Atlantic Ocean. We will promise you a 40-hour working week. And a lot of people decided to make their way to a place called Spindle City, which is in Massachusetts. And there they showed everyone how to use what's called the Lancashire loom. A loom is a weaving machine. And to this very, very day, you can go to Boston and pick up a telephone book, and every second name is a Lancastrian one. However, to this very, very day, on Darwin Street in Blackburn, you will see a blue plaque commemorating this terrible act of violence that took place on the 15th of August, 1842. They say to this very, very day that that road is haunted by the textile workers who lost their lives. There's been stories of taxi drivers driving down that road in the early hours of the morning and having to dodge people that have suddenly emerged from the pavement or suddenly from the sides of buildings. It was a terrible day, probably the blackest day in the history of the town of Blackburn.
Wow. Wow, what a story. I had no idea that Massachusetts had that, everybody from Lancashire. That's amazing, Simon. And to this day, they pop right out of the pavement and come out of the buildings. That's, wow.
It's a very, very spooky street, Darwin Street. It really, really is.
Wow. Is that the Riot Act? Is that where that saying comes from, Simon, that they read the Riot Act? Is that where that comes from?
They have to read the Riot Act. That's quite correct, Cisco. The Riot Act takes power from, shall I say, central government and gives it to local town councils. And, of course, the Riot Act was read that day. It was a very, very black day in the history of Blackburn, really.
Wow.
But I've got plenty of other stories, and this is quite a modern story, really, Cisco.
Okay.
I have a very good friend called Andrew. I've got to know him extremely well, and every time I see him, he always has a smile on his face. I asked him why. He said, well, Simon, I've been pronounced dead on 3 occasions. So we're now going to turn the clock back to a beautiful summer's day, and a road in Lancashire called the A59. It's a very, very busy road. Some people call it the coast-to-coast road, linking the west coast with the east coast of the north of England. Now, Andrew went to a village called Gisborne on the 24th of August 1997. He went with a good friend called David, and they had a few pints of beer in the pub. Now, David had a very, very powerful German sports car called a BMW. And He perhaps drank a bit too much than he should have done, really. Both lads climbed inside the vehicle and drove back from the village of Gisborne towards Clitheroe. Now, David put his foot right down on the accelerator and was clocking at speeds of 70 to 80 miles an hour. He took a corner very awkwardly. He lost control of the BMW and it hit a tree with a really big thud. The engine came out of its mounting and crushed Andrew in the seat, breaking his ankles, breaking his femur, breaking his pelvis, and also causing severe chest injuries. He was knocked unconscious by the blow. Now, the A59 is a very busy road, and vehicles were travelling past at the time, and it wasn't long before an ambulance arrived and a fire crew arrived. The fire crew had to cut the top of the car off to free Andrew and indeed David. When they took the roof off the car, David, by some miracle, was uninjured. He had his seatbelt on, and of course the engine had come from the other side and had crushed poor Andrew. The fire crews lifted the engine off Andrew, and his body was placed by the side of the car. And one of the firemen said, "Oh no, this lad's had it. He's definitely dead." The ambulance crew arrived, and they were more concerned about David, who was suffering from shock. But one of the ambulance crew had a look at the prone body of Andrew and just saw a flicker in his eyelid and said, "Hey, this lad's still alive." Just. A helicopter arrived, the air ambulance, and they put Andrew in the air ambulance and set off for the town of Blackburn, not too far away. From leaving the crash scene towards Blackburn, Andrew had what's called a cardiac arrest. The paramedics on the helicopter, by the use of a defibrillator, got his heart working once again. And as they were about to land in Blackburn, he had another cardiac arrest, and the helicopter was told to divert to the special care unit in the city of Manchester. On arriving in the city of Manchester, he was wheeled from the heliport into the casualty department at Manchester Crumpsall Hospital, where the surgeons set to work straight away. This is when Andrew had a most amazing experience. He said, "Simon, I felt extremely calm. I left my body and found myself looking down at my body from the ceiling of the theatre. I felt completely at ease with myself. I felt very happy, very content. But I gazed down and I saw my body on the operating table with these 3 huge clamps opening my chest and surgeons working feverishly. I had no idea at the time, but my aorta in my heart had been badly ripped, and I was in a critical state. I glanced to my right, and I saw a beautiful, beautiful cornfield. In the cornfield, I saw one of my heroes, Jimi Hendrix, Phil Lynott, John Entwistle from The Who, and also on the drums, none other than Keith Moon from The Who. They seemed to be playing quite happily. It was my favourite music. I then glanced to my left again and looked down at my body, and I saw one of the surgeons leave my body and walk towards the sinks. A nurse removed his mask, and I saw a young man with a pencil-thin moustache and little round spectacles. And on the back of his theatre jacket, theatre coat was indeed the name of the hospital. I then felt myself going back down towards my body, and the music from the cornfield seemed to disappear. For the next 3 months, I was in a coma. I had no idea, but my mother had come to see me every single day. And after three long months, I woke up. I opened my eyes, and my mother was by my side, and she burst into tears at seeing me actually open my eyes. And the surgeon came rushing in when he heard I'd come round, and said, "Well done, Andrew. You're back with us. You've been unconscious the last 3 months." And I said, "Oh, I remember you very, very well, Doctor. You were working my body. I saw you." "No, impossible, Andrew. That's impossible. You've been unconscious for 3 months. You haven't opened your eyes for 3 months." No, I saw you. I also saw a nurse. She mopped your brow, and if I remember, she mentioned something about Ibiza. He thought, "That's incredible." Well, the nurse was my wife, and the following day, we were both on holiday in Ibiza.
Wow.
Andrew had an out-of-body experience. But what did happen quite recently is he somehow acquired some skills. He told me he went to a lovely restaurant in the town of Clitheroe called the Emporium. It's a beautiful, beautiful Victorian building. It used to be the old Methodist chapel before it was converted into a small factory in the 1970s. And then towards 2006, it was bought by a local businessman and turned into a restaurant. Andrew went in quite recently, and he sat down at one of the tables with a good friend and ordered some drinks. He then looked up and saw an elderly gentleman at the end of the bar that seemed to want to get his attention. Each time Andrew looked up, he was there, almost like staring straight at him. Andrew felt a little bit uneasy. The gentleman was wearing clothing you'd associate with really the 1940s, 1950s. And Andrew said to his friend, that man at the bar, he keeps looking at me. His friend said, Andrew, there's no one there. Yes, there is. He's there. I can see him. The figure then gently bowed his head and disappeared. Andrew came to see me about this situation that he'd just experienced. And I went to the library in the town of Clitheroe and got a book on the history of all the Methodist chapels in the area. And as I skipped through the pages, there was a photograph of the Reverend John Mullineaux, who was the last Reverend at the old Methodist chapel. I showed Andrew the picture. His jaw dropped. He said, Simon, that was the man at the end of the bar that I was looking at. A very, very, very true story, Cisco.
Wow. It seems like he brought a little bit of the other side back with him, didn't he, Simon?
He's a very lucky lad. He
Yes.
always has this smile on his face. And he said, Simon, I believe there is life after death, and I believe I was about to enter the other side. And you can always tell when someone is being very, very honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very honest with you. And he certainly was very honest.
Well, that's lovely to hear, to think that, that's one thing my listeners are always looking towards is their life after death. And we can thank Andrew for that because that's wonderful. And to have all his wonderful music there, too, with Phil Lynott and Keith Moon. And that's wonderful.
I think it was marvellous, really, but it was actually quite beautiful music. And to see Jimi Hendrix perform with those lads must have been quite something else, really. So
yes.
perhaps when we all get up there,
yes.
we might have a great time. We might have a great time, really.
I think that's
but
wonderful.
Our next story, our next story is all about an affair of the heart, really.
Wonderful.
And it's all about a lovely house in the town of Clitheroe. It's a beautiful Victorian house. And we're going to turn the clock back now to 1907. The house was owned by John and Edith Mercer. They were both 47 years old, and they got married for the very, very first time. Now, the last thing they expected was to have a child. Edith conceived, and she gave birth to a perfectly healthy baby boy. This boy was loved beyond all words can comprehend. He was looked on, really, as a gift from the gods. Sadly, just before his 4th birthday, he contracted a terrible disease called scarlet fever. Nowadays, of course, scarlet fever can be easily treated by antibiotics, but in those days, of course, antibiotics did not exist. He died, breaking his mother and father's hearts. We now pick up the story 25 years later, when the local window cleaner, a chap called John Gorham, arrived on the scene, and John placed his ladder against the window of the Mercer household. As he cleaned the window, in the corner of the room, he saw a little boy just waving and smiling. He waved back, and the little boy waved back at him and followed him to each room. After doing the job for a good, shall we say, 15 months, Mr. Gorham thought, that little boy is not getting any taller. In fact, that little boy is always wearing the same clothes. He had a word with Mrs. Harrison, who lived next door, and she laughed. Oh, no, Mr. Gorham, no. You're seeing things. The Mercers had a little boy, but he died a long, long time ago. He then plucked at the courage and knocked to Mrs. Mercer's door. Mrs. Mercer, I have no wish, no intention to upset you. And please forgive me if I do upset you. but every time I clean the windows, there's always a little boy upstairs. A huge smile came across Mrs. Mercer's face. Oh, Mr. Gorham, don't worry. It's my little boy. He's never left me, you know. And that, I can assure you, is a very true story.
It's wonderful. Wonderful. Wow. It's wild the way she took it that way, too, because you would expect her to be upset, but she was happy by that he's never left. Good for her.
She must have loved him so much, really.
Yes.
But our next story is all about a painting.
Mm.
And we go to the museum, a beautiful, beautiful Victorian building in the town of Clitheroe in northern England. The building is now run by the local authority, and it is indeed a civic museum. However, it was built for a very, very wealthy family called the Shaw family, and they were indeed textile barons. In 1935, Mrs. Joan Shaw employed a local painter called John Carradus to paint her building. He arrived with his easel and his oil paints and did a beautiful job getting in all the windows, the doors, and the balustrade. It looked beautiful. However, there was just a slight discrepancy with one of the windows in the painting. He may have used too much paint. It could have been a kink in the canvas, but what he had actually made was an optical illusion. As you walked towards the painting, a figure suddenly appeared in the right-hand window of the painting. You stood back, the figure disappeared. It was indeed an optical illusion. In fact, John Carradus didn't even know he'd put it there. When he finished the painting, he gave it to Mrs. Shaw, and she saw the discrepancy right away. Mr. Carradus, I did not pay you to put that man in that right-hand window. Oh, it's not a man. It's not a man. It's just where the canvas has become slightly kinked, and I may have used too much paint. Mr. Carradus, you will eradicate that man in that right-hand window immediately. With a minute swish of his brush, he eliminated the little figure in the right-hand window, and the painting now hung in the main entrance to the Shaw residence. Now, that night, Mrs. Shaw's eldest daughter, Jacqueline, became engaged to a Blackburn Rovers footballer, a young boy called Neil Williamson. Neil was a right-back for the football club Blackburn Rovers. He also played for England. He was quite a tough lad. He was a defender, if you will. They had a marvellous party in the Shaw residence, and Neil was given a room, the same room with the discrepancy in the painting. He climbed into bed and fell into a deep sleep. In the early hours of the morning, he was woken by a drop in temperature. As he pulled the bedclothes back from his face, he saw standing at the end of the bed a man with a long black coat with what looked like a cigar or cigarette in the mouth. He thought, burglar. He jumped out of bed and took a swing at the character. As his fist entered the character just disappeared, but left a very, very strong aroma of tobacco. He was horrified. He rushed next door and woke up Jacqueline. Jacqueline laughed at him. So did Mr. and Mrs. Shaw, and so did the two brothers, James and Ian. However, within 5 days, the whole household had seen the same character at the end of their beds. It was indeed Jacqueline who sussed it. I've got it! The person we've all been seeing is the person that John Carradus eradicated with a paintbrush in the right-hand window pane of the painting. It is, said Mrs. Shaw. It is, Jacqueline, right. That painting's going. And they gave the painting to fellow textile barons in the town of Accrington, a place called Springfield House. And the Springfield family had a huge, huge textile factory. And they had a huge home called the Springfield Residence. The Springfield mills have long since closed down, but the residence is still there, and the painting hangs in the residence, which is now an old people's residence. And many, many people have seen a ghostly character wearing a long black coat, silver blonde hair, and a love for cigars or cigarettes. Many people have asked, how has he got there? We don't know, but what we do know is he has followed the painting that John Carradus made all those years ago. The character looks very like the British Prime Minister from the 1960s, Harold Wilson, who used to always wear a long black gabardine mac and had a love for cigars and pipes.
Wow. And he's following the painting. Oh, man. That's wild, Simon. Phew.
It's an awesome story.
It is.
Awesome story.
It is indeed. It is indeed. We hear many things about ghosts being attached to certain objects. So perhaps that's what he's doing. He's attached to that painting. That's amazing.
It just could be. There's nothing I like more, Cisco, than meeting people who've had ghostly experiences. And you can always tell when, to use a British term, when someone's pulling your leg, when someone's having a bit of fun with you. But you can always tell when someone's very, very serious. And I did meet a marvellous gentleman quite a few years ago called Mr. William Lakin. And I put ads in my local newspaper for people who had experienced ghostly experiences. He came to my home. I made him a cup of tea. He then reached into his pocket and produced a photograph taken in 1939 outside a very, very famous building called St Mary's Parish Church Office in Clitheroe, which was indeed the old Territorial Army barracks for that period of time. On the back of the photograph was everyone's name and the words Clitheroe Territorial Army. In 1939, they had a photograph taken in front of the old building, the tallest at the back and the shortest at the front. This is when Great Britain and the Commonwealth declared war on Nazi Germany. As soon as the photograph was taken, the Clitheroe platoon made their way down to the railway station and right down to the south coast of England, across the English Channel, to France, where they made their way to a place called the Maginot Line. The Maginot Line were French fortifications. They were told they were impregnable. For 10 months, Bill and his mates marched up and down the Maginot Line, and they came across German troops. It was called the Phony War. No one really seemed to want to start it. And Bill mentioned that he bartered British cigarettes for German cigarettes, British bully beef tins for German stew, and they bartered. However, this all changed on the 10th of May, 1940, when the Germans launched what we call Blitzkrieg, Lightning War. Bill was horrified one day to be told by his officer, "Right, boys, leave all your equipment. We're being evacuated. We're going to make our way to the channel port of Dunkirk on the north coast of France." It took Bill 4 days and 4 nights to get there with the German army hot on his tail. When he got to Dunkirk, the beach had over 300,000 British soldiers, all waiting to be evacuated by a small flotilla of ships, codenamed Operation Dynamo. Over in England, the Royal Navy had organised Operation Dynamo, where they requisitioned all the passenger vessels in the area, all the ferries to get these men back to England. Bill waited for 4 days on the beach of Dunkirk, being relentlessly attacked by the German Air Force, and there he lost 3 very, very close friends. On the 4th day, he was told, "Right, boys, it's our turn to be evacuated." They made their way down to the water's edge. A German aircraft came screaming down the beach and opened fire with devastating effect. Bill dived into the cold, icy water of the English Channel. When he came to the surface, the water was crimson red with the blood of his mates. He felt a hand grab his battle-dress tunic. He was dragged onto a small rowing boat by a Royal Naval sailor and then rowed out to a Royal Naval destroyer, where he received the finest meal he's ever had, the first food in 10 days, a corned beef sandwich, a mug of tea, and a delicious cigarette. As he smoked the cigarette, he said he could have kissed the sailor, the first food in weeks. He got to Dover in the English Channel, couldn't find any of his friends whatsoever, and he was told by an officer, "Look, don't worry, you don't need any money, just get on the next train and get back to your battalion headquarters," which of course was Clitheroe in Lancashire. He boarded the train from Dover to London, London to Preston, and Preston to the town of Clitheroe. When he got to Clitheroe, he kissed the railway platform. He was delighted to get back home again and made his way to the St Mary's Parish Church Hall the old TA place where he'd been told to report. When he got there, out of the 57 men on that photograph, only 19 had got back, including himself. When he walked into the building, he was shocked at just how few men had got back, and they were told there and then to make up the numbers to have a recruitment drive. In those days, if you were 18 years old, you were conscripted, but you could join up at the age of 17, but you had to have your mother and father's consent, and for this reason, both parents were given a consent form. Now, Bill was 19. He had a young friend who was 17 who said, "Oh, Bill, please go and see my mum and dad. Get them to sign this consent form. I want to fight for my country." Bill saw this young boy's parents and they said, "Sorry, he's our only son. The war could be over next year anyway. Oh, please, Mum, please, Dad. I want to fight for my country. Please sign the form." They gave in, providing Bill promised he would look after the boy like a brother, and he swore he would do. So they signed the forms and the young lad joined up. They were then sent to the beautiful Greek island of Crete with the Australian and New Zealand armed forces. There, on the 21st of May, the Germans launched a highly disciplined airborne invasion of Crete by using the very, very cream of the German armed forces. The fighting was quite ferocious on the island. The New Zealanders, known as the Maoris, they put up quite a good fight, but the Germans had total air cover, better equipment, and they took the island. Sadly, in the fighting, in Bill's platoon, 12 boys were killed, including the 17-year-old young lad. Bill was absolutely devastated at the death of this young boy and blamed himself entirely. He was captured. He was sent to a German POW camp, and for the Red Cross he could write letters back to this young boy's parents, just simply begging their forgiveness. They wrote back and said, "We do not blame you for the death of our son." However, Bill carried this burden on his shoulders until the 24th of December, 1968, when he went to the old Clitheroe Parish Church office, the old TA centre, to watch the Clitheroe Amateur Operatic Society's Christmas play. He was the very, very last person to leave the building and lit a cigarette. As he smoked the cigarette, he looked at the wall where, in 1939, he and all those young boys had waited for the photograph to be taken. He took a deep sigh and extinguished the cigarette with his feet. He then walked to the left of the building, down a little cobbled street. As he turned the corner, he heard 3 whispers. "Hey, Bill! Hey, Bill! Hey, Billy!" He turned round and saw the ghost of the young lad standing in the little alleyway next to the old building. The boy hadn't changed. He looked exactly as he had done in Crete in 1941. The boy raised his ghostly arm. "Bill, Bill, don't worry about me, Bill. I'm fine. I've always been okay, Bill. Don't worry about me, Bill." Billy's knees gave way. He knelt on the cobblestones in that little alleyway by the side of the building, and in his own words, he bellowed like a wounded animal. The tears streamed down his cheeks. He almost yelped in pain. As he looked up, the boy turned, waved, smiled, and disappeared. Bill got to his feet in a state of trauma. He was deeply, deeply traumatized. He walked home that Christmas Eve past the happy Christmas revellers. The last thing he felt was celebrating anything. He was deeply, deeply upset. He got home, he climbed into bed, and quite surprisingly, had the best night's sleep he'd had in years. The following morning, he was woken by the church bells on Christmas morning, the bells of St. Paul's, St. Mary's, and St. James. He got out of bed, feeling a lot better. He made his way to the bathroom, and as he opened the door, he saw the shaving mirror and caught his reflection. He looked again and again at his reflection in the mirror and noticed a change in his facial appearance. He noticed for the first time since 1941 he was actually smiling, and he felt he'd been truly forgiven for the death of this young boy all those years ago on the Greek island of Crete. I will never forget Bill's words. As he left my home that day, he said, "Simon, I did not believe in ghosts until I saw one with my own eyes." And they're Bill's words, not mine. Bill died 15 years ago. Because I knew him, I did feel obliged to go to his funeral. And as I sat in the church at St. Paul's, the Reverend talked about his past life. I then went to the interment, and as his coffin was being lowered into the grave, I saw two gentlemen standing by the grave. I had a diplomatic word with one of them. He said, "Oh yes, we were all captured by the Germans on the island of Crete." I mentioned the young boy. "Oh yes, yes, yes. Bill was looking after him. The Germans were getting so close to our trenches that Bill sent him back to the ammunition truck to hide behind the ammunition truck, which had a metal tailgate. But sadly, a German sniper caught him in open ground." A very sad story, but also a very true story, Cisco.
Wonderful. That's got to be one of the best Christmas gifts he could have got, for that ghost to come through and tell him, "Don't worry, take that burden off of you. Don't worry about me." That's beautiful.
He got peace of mind,
Yes.
and at least he was truly forgiven for the death of this young boy.
Yes.
But in his own words, "Simon, I did not believe in ghosts until I saw one with my own eyes." Obviously, this lad must have come through to try and relieve him of that burden.
How wonderful. How wonderful. Yeah, I wish that could happen for everybody, don't you, Simon?
I really, really do. Really do.
That's wonderful. That's a nice story. I like that story. I mean, it's sad that the boy had to die. We lost so many in so many different wars, but that is a burden that each one carries that do come back, and it would be nice that could happen. That's a wonderful story.
Beautiful, beautiful story. I've got one. Our next story is really, you could say, an Anglo-American story, and also a Yorkshire story, really.
Wonderful.
I conduct tours in this very, very beautiful building called Samlesbury Hall. And Samlesbury Hall was built in 1322 and has many, many centuries history. There is a huge connection with one chap who got married there in 1774. He was a lieutenant in the British Army of the name of John Queesack. John married a very, very attractive young lady of the name of Gail Bradall, and her father was the owner of Samlesbury Hall at that period of time. It was a beautiful wedding, but John Queesack was a serving British Army officer. He was sent to the then British colony of North America, and he was sent to Pittsburgh, from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia, from the barracks in Philadelphia to New England. And his wife absolutely loved New England. And she said, "Oh, John, why don't you resign your commission and become a civilian? This land is so much opportunity." "Marvellous," said John. "I've had enough of the army anyway." And he resigned his commission and settled. He started his own business in New England and was doing very, very well. However, one person seemed to notice this more than anyone else, good old King George back in England, and he thought, these people need taxing and taxing and taxing again. And John said to his wife, "I'm working so hard, and all I'm doing is paying tax back to England. It just isn't fair, really." His neighbours felt the same as well. One day, he met a gentleman who recognised his northern English accent, a gentleman called George Washington. And George Washington's family came from the village of Yelland Redmayne in Lancashire. And of course, George recognised John's English accent, northern accent, and knew that he'd served in the British Army. "John, I understand you served in the British Army. I would like to form a rebel army and throw the British administration out of North America. Will you join me?" "I will join you. I'm sick and tired of this taxation. It's got beyond a joke. This country needs to be independent." So Queesack became what's called a Pathfinder General with what the British called the rebel forces. He was at Lexington, he was at Concord, he was at Bunker Hill, he was at Ticonderoga, he was at the final surrender at Yorktown in 1781. Now the Brits had gone, Creasap was summoned to Washington's headquarters. "Ah, John, I'd like to offer you a new position in the new United States Armed Forces as a general. Will you take this position?" "I will, sir." "I would now like you to carry out your next mission, which is to encourage the Native Americans to leave New England, New Hampshire, New Jersey. Don't care how you do it, just do it." I think it's fair to say that John Creasap did have the blood of many an innocent squaw and many an innocent brave in his hands. But all good things come to an end when he was captured by the Huron, North American Canadian Indians. And just like John Wayne in a famous Western movie, all his men were dispatched by the Indians, and he was tied to the totem pole and ordered to be given the death of 1,000 cuts. Now, Creasap came from Yorkshire, and Yorkshire folk are renowned for being very, very stubborn. The British expedition gentleman, the name of Sir Ralph Fiennes, will take no one from Yorkshire on any of his tours because they like to complain about everything. Creasap was no different. He was tied to the totem pole and was heard to say the words, "You'll get nowt from me." The Indians were quite shocked by his bravery. They thought, this man can't be real. They were frightened of him. They thought, he's not scared of being burnt alive. He's not scared. They were scared of him. So they released his bonds. He rushed back into the forest and got back to Washington's headquarters. "Sir, I really have had enough of this, sir. I would like to return to my native Craven in the West Riding of Yorkshire back in England." And George Washington said there and then, "John, my country is indebted to you. You will always be an American citizen." Well, he got back to his native Yorkshire. He died at the age of 74 and is buried at a place called New Pudsey, near the city of Leeds in Yorkshire. And I understand that every 4th of July, a member of the American Embassy will make her or his way up from London to make sure the grave has been polished and some fresh flowers placed on the grave. And it proudly says, "General John Creasap, United States Armed Forces." They say that the happiest day of his life was getting married at Salisbury Hall in 1774. His ghostly figure has been seen at Salisbury Hall. He is the all-American, all-Yorkshire hero.
Wow. I'd never heard that story before. That's quite amazing. And it's odd that I can tell you, being Native American myself, that there is a lot of tribal customs that if you show bravery and you show no fear, a lot of times you will be let go because they revered that. So there you go. How about that?
He must have been quite a brave lad, really.
Absolutely. I don't know if I could have been as brave, that's for sure. Wow. I'd never heard that one, Simon.
It's just a beautiful story, isn't it, really? A beautiful story.
It is. It is. And, you know, these stories, you taking the time to tell us these stories, I can't thank you enough. Do you have another short one? I don't want to keep you too long.
Cisco, it is always a pleasure to talk to you, my dear. It really, really is. And I do feel, really relaxed and very, very happy on your show. So I've got plenty of material, actually. The most important thing is not to cover things that we covered in our last broadcast.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Last time we did the Jack the Ripper, we did the Pendle Witches, and we did a couple of haunted pubs, and we did speak of the Roman soldiers with
yes,
that came through. Yes, they came through there. Wow.
That was from the city of York, wasn't it, really?
Yes, it was. I believe it was. After you tell me one, I'm going to tell you one so you can have it as a gift to you. The ghost story that happened to me.
Well, this next story is quite a unique one. A very, very unique story. It's all about the old West Riding of Yorkshire. And we're going to talk about a farmer called Jim Dawson. Jim was 47 years old. He was very, very well liked. He was a farmer. And March the 18th, 1934, he walked down this beautiful country lane with hedgerows on either side to a local inn called the Eddisford Bridge Inn. According to the landlord, John Barnes, he had 6 pints of beer, followed by a glass of gin, and then walked home in total darkness. On the journey back to his farm, a vehicle with its headlamps on full came past him, and the headlamps illuminated the figure 300 yards down the lane, looking down the lane towards him. As the car went past, darkness descended the lane once again, and Jim carried on walking. He was 800 yards from the back door of the kitchen on the farm when he heard a click from behind the hedgerow and felt a severe whack to the shoulder and thought, he's thrown a stone at me. He quickened his pace. He got back to the farm. His 2 sisters had a 3-course supper ready for him. He enjoyed the meal. He had another bottle of beer. And then he said, I think I'll retire for the night. He climbed into bed and fell into a deep sleep. Around 4:30 in the morning, he complained of an agonizing pain in his left side, and his 2 sisters came rushing into the bedroom. They removed his pyjama jacket. They rolled him over and were horrified to find blood on the bed, but also under his arm, an open wound. They called a doctor. The doctor arrived, Dr. Cooper, and said, Mr. Dawson, I could be wrong, but I think you've been shot. Don't worry, we'll get you to the Royal Infirmary right away. At the local infirmary, they took an X-ray, and he had indeed been shot, but not by a conventional bullet, but a very, very strange shaped bullet, the shape and size of a small bird's egg. The surgeon said, Mr. Dawson, don't worry, we have located the bullet, and we shall remove this right away. Oh, no, you won't. I don't like operations. In fact, I'm terrified of operations. I've served through World War One. I've seen lads die having bullets taken at them. You're not touching me. The surgeons pleaded, but Jim Dawson was an adult. They could not force him. All they could do was just put a bandage over the wound and send him back home again. On arriving back home in the West Riding of Yorkshire, he contacted the West Yorkshire Police. They sent 2 officers, Inspector Blake, Inspector Elliott, and as they looked at the landscape around the area, they thought, oh, this will be a piece of cake. We'll have this problem sorted very, very quickly. They interviewed Jim Dawson. Now, Mr. Dawson, last night, as you walked down that country lane, you said you saw in the beam of the car headlamps a figure. How tall was this figure? What clothing and what colour hair? I can't tell you. It was too far away, said Jim Dawson. So therefore the 2 inspectors, the 2 detectives, came across a wall of silence. Right, let's interview every single person in the area. Let's also ask them to bring their shotguns, their air weapons, their pistols, and we'll look at every weapon in the area. The villagers arrived at the local public house, and they left all their shotguns and air weapons in the courtyard of the public house called the Eddisford Bridge. They refused to talk to the police. They just left the firearms there. On the 3rd day, Jim's wound turned septic. Against his wishes, against his will, he was rushed back to the Royal Infirmary for an emergency operation where the surgeons did remove this rather ugly shaped bullet, the shape and size of a small bird's egg. But Jim, sadly, died that night of septicemia. The West Yorkshire Police then realised they had a murder in their hands, and murder, way back in 1934, would and did hit the front page of every newspaper in Great Britain. The West Yorkshire Police could not get a single lead because the locals wouldn't talk to them. The children wouldn't talk. No one would talk to the police. But this was murder. They could not close the case. All they could do was hand it over to Scotland Yard. And Scotland Yard sent one of the most famous detectives for that period of time, Chief Inspector William Blake, Sir William Blake. Now, as a young lad, he had been in the Metropolitan Police, and he really did know his stuff. And he was a bit like a Canadian Mountie. He always got his man. He arrived at the railway station in Clitheroe and boasted to the Daily Mail, the Daily Telegraph, and the Daily Mirror, I shall have these peasant farmers behind bars by 3 o'clock this afternoon. He had the River Ribble dragged for the murder weapon. He had the bullet removed from poor Jim's flesh, sent down to the ballistics section at Scotland Yard, where the forensic team said the bullet is homemade. It will not fit any known caliber rifle. It's been made from cheap agricultural metal. It's been placed on a lathe, rotated at high speed to make it more sharper and more aerodynamic, and fired from some form of strange weapon, possibly an air weapon or possibly some form of crossbow. The murder weapon has never ever been found, and Inspector William Blake and indeed Elliot made their way back to their respective police forces, the laughingstock of Scotland Yard and the West Yorkshire Police. However, the villagers, they know exactly who shot Jim Dawson. They know why he was shot, but it's the most jealously guarded secret within the old West Riding of Yorkshire. The hamlet is called the Village That Refused to Talk. Many people say they've seen the ghost of Jim Dawson down that lane. They say that he knew the person that shot him, but like the villagers, he too was bound for silence. A very, very spooky story. In 1987, a postal delivery vehicle around the Christmas period was making its way down that very lane. The driver screamed as a figure came out of the hedge, entered the dashboard, went through the dashboard, through him, and out of the back of the vehicle. He drove back to the postal office, and they all laughed at him, apart from one old postman who said, "You've seen the ghost of Jim Dawson, my friend."
Wow. Oh my goodness. I cannot imagine seeing it go through your car like that. That's crazy. Poor Mr. Dawson. Who knows? His secret went to the grave with him, Simon.
Definitely. It's the most amazing story. And of course, listeners can go into Google search and put the Bashall Eaves mystery. The Bashall Eaves mystery. And they'll find it quite exhilarating.
My goodness. Where you're from, the history alone, it just goes back so far, much further than ours here in the United States. Of course, history, it depends on where you start and count from. But the amount of pubs and homes and castles and, other things that are still there. Some of the streets are still the same and kept up. The history there is so rich, so rich. It's amazing. And there's no doubt that there is a ghost at every turn.
I think when you look at like the city of Edinburgh in Scotland, city of York in Yorkshire, London still has some great streets and some amazing stories behind it, really. Mm-hmm. But I think you can find probably the most ugliest town in Great Britain, and it would be full of heroes, full of villains, and full of stories, of course.
Absolutely. Well, Simon, I cannot thank you enough for spending this time with us. The only thing I can think to do is give you one of my ghost stories. Would you like to hear it?
Cisco, it would be a pleasure, my dear.
Okay. Well, here we are. You have to imagine. I took my family to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania on Halloween night. It was a couple of years ago. Now, Pennsylvania, this was, of course, in October. The leaves are, all fallen, and, the trees were so beautiful. The colors are just amazing in Pennsylvania. It is very, it's just very protected and just beautiful. And downtown Gettysburg is amazing. And if you go there and you ask the locals, well, where's the battlefield? And, of course, they're talking about the Battle of Gettysburg, where 53,000 people fell within 3 days. Not all of them being shot dead, most of them dying from their wounds because they're... it just wasn't, we didn't know a lot about taking care of wounds back then, and, they would get very infected and die, and many things happened. So being a soldier myself, I had a big heart for all the fallen, and we were waiting to go on a tour, and our motel was right across the street from the cemetery that Abraham Lincoln gave his famous Gettysburg Address from. So we walked across the street, and it was getting dark, and it was about to close, and we wanted to run in real fast and see what we could see. And there's a beautiful memorial that has the Gettysburg Address written out on the cement there, and a large head of Abraham Lincoln. And we went up and we read that. And my sons were standing there, and they were finishing reading it, and then they kind of walked out, and they said, well, give me a minute. I want to go over here and pay my respects. Because in the center, right by the opening, there is a pie-shaped, like a circle, and they have pie shapes cut in it, and within those pie shapes are unknown soldiers from several wars. And I felt very overwhelmed standing there, and I told them to go on and wait for me and see if they could find the street we were supposed to walk up to go to the tour. And they went outside, and they were chit-chatting, and I could see them from where I was. And I stood in the center of this circle, Simon, and I felt so... I can't explain the feeling. It was like a heavy weight, but at the same time welcoming. It's hard to explain. And I just felt overcome, and I said, if anyone is here, I just would like you to know that I'm here to pay my respects, that you are not forgotten. I appreciate what you have done. I was a soldier myself, and I just spoke on like that. And the feeling kind of lifted a little as I was talking, and I could just feel like I was surrounded. I couldn't see them, but boy, I could feel them. And I was overcome with emotion, and I just finished what I was saying, and I said, I want to leave you with some kind of comfort. Would you allow me to do that? And I felt that it was okay. And the only thing I could think of was to say the Lord's Prayer. So I said the Lord's Prayer, and I finished up. And I said, just remember, you are remembered. You know, I'm sad that your names aren't on here, but I remember you. And I started to walk away. And as I started to walk away, I felt almost like a hand on my shoulder, like a little pressing from behind. And I turned around, and I honestly expect someone to be standing there. And of course, no one was. And as I turned around, I didn't get startled. I just said, I hope you heard that, and I hope it brought you some comfort. And I turned and finished to walk down the path towards my sons. And at that point in time, I saw my oldest son, Jess. He was kind of kicking around in the leaves because the sidewalk, of course, was covered with fallen leaves. And I thought he had dropped something. I paid no mind. I just kept walking towards him because I was just overcome with all this emotion from what had just happened. And he reached down and he picked it up. And he looked up towards me, and he looked at his hand, and he looked back towards me. And I'm like, well, what's going on? And he started to walk towards me to meet me on the trail. And as he got to me, he opened his hand and handed me something. And he said, someone said this is for you. And he shows me a sterling silver crucifix that he had found in the leaves. And I just looked at it, and I had just said the Lord's Prayer. And I just got this warm feeling. And I said, who said? And he said, I heard a whisper in my ear, Mom, this is for your mother. And he put it in my hand, and I turned around and I looked behind me, and I said, thank you guys very much. And a tiny little swirl of leaves in the center of the pie shape where the unknown soldiers were buried, where the leaves were dancing. And I felt better. How about that?
That is quite beautiful. There's definitely a connection there, isn't there? There's got to be.
There's got to be. I wear it around my neck to this day.
Oh gosh, the way you've described that, Cisco, I was actually there. I could see it. I must say, I have been to Pennsylvania, and it's a very, very beautiful county, isn't it? Really.
Oh, it's just gorgeous.
I went to a place called the Laurel Highlands, and went to a place called Fort Necessity, and that was absolutely awesome. Where the British had to build this fort very, very quickly to stop the French and the Indians getting into Pennsylvania. But it's an amazing county, isn't it, really? And very friendly people I've found there, really friendly.
Yes, and it's quite beautiful, either in the wintertime for all the snow, and of course it's just beautiful, and in the fall. I just went back this weekend. They were having a gathering there, and it's just, if you ever get the chance to go, absolutely go. You can feel it before you ever hit the town. The amount of, you want to talk about ghosts that are hanging around. Gettysburg is the place. And why, I don't know. Well, they say the courts and everything else, that's underground. But, something my native elders always said, the ground remembers, the rock remembers, the trees remember. And
I'm sure.
Yeah,
sure.
And any battle.
Cisco, is Valley Forge near there?
Valley Forge, I am not very far from Valley Forge. Yes, I have been there.
Because, that's very famous, isn't it? Really famous.
Yes, and all around here where I live now in New Jersey, there was so much here from the Revolutionary War all the way up, not very far from here, just a few miles from where I was, the Battle of Monmouth. And I'm sure you've heard about Molly Pitcher. And Molly Pitcher going to the well to keep the water going. And she wasn't just bringing water to the thirsty soldiers, but they had to pour water on the cannons to keep them cooler so they could keep shooting them. Yep, and her well is still there. Her well is still there.
On British television, BBC TV, they have an Antiques Roadshow. It's a fantastic series.
Love it.
People can bring artifacts, and then the experts look at the artifacts. Many years ago, just after the American War of Independence, there was really because of the Second War of Independence, where again America and Britain clashed, and there's quite an incredible story of an invasion where the Royal Navy and Royal Marines made their way up the Potomac River straight into Washington and actually attacked the White House. And in the White House was a very, very brave lady called Dolly. In fact, I can't remember her. She
Madison.
The president. Yeah, that's right.
Dolly Madison.
Dolly Madison. And she did, in fact, cut from the... she actually removed George Washington's oil painting before the... I think it was, again, the Scottish regiment, the Black Watch, before they set fire to the building and then made their way to the Congressional building and set fire to that as well. But I believe that Dolly, God bless her, she was a hero of the whole affair because she saved vital artifacts. But one Scottish soldier made his way upstairs into the bedroom and stole some love letters. And these love letters re-emerged on this BBC television programme about 5 years ago that had been written by President Madison. And they must have been priceless, really, but this Scottish officer, he had even stolen some shirts and clothing that belonged to the president, and they all emerged on this Antiques Roadshow. But when you look at that famous painting of George Washington, it must be priceless.
Absolutely.
It must be absolutely priceless. And to think that Dolly saved it is some great history, I think, really.
Absolutely. And she was something else. She's one of my favorite first ladies because she, just some things off the top of my head about Dolly Madison. Her big thing was the social. She wanted to be the it girl of the time as far as being ahead of, what was popular to serve, the parties. Mr. Madison, of course, wasn't into that. He just let her do her thing. And she said, well, if you want to move up and you want to keep current, you want everybody, you want to be popular, you have to have everyone over and you have to be, the newest things from Paris and all that. So she was always well dressed. She always wore huge, big marabou feathers in her hair, and she was just a delight. Her hair was always well done up, and she was always dressed to the nines.
Yeah.
And her favorite thing, I can remember reading about, ice cream was just becoming popular, and it was all the rage to have it as the dessert and sometimes as an appetizer. You would never guess what her favorite flavor ice cream was, Simon.
It's got to be caramel.
No, that's mine.
Oh, right.
No, because you think about what kind of flavors would be popular then. You figure fruit or strawberry or vanilla or whatever.
Yes.
The most popular ice cream when Dolly Madison was in the White House was oyster.
Oh, my goodness.
Now, isn't that a surprise?
That really, really is.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine oyster ice cream, right? But she was something else, and one of the most prized things that she did to doll up the White House was to put in that beautiful rose garden that you often see them talking from. That's the same one.
Yes.
They've added and they've kept it together. Now, then I can't remember how many presidents later, I think it was 2, that when they came in, of course, the presidents are allowed to redo the White House the way they wish, and, the first lady's usually in charge of decorating. And the one that came in said, I want that rose garden moved. And she, of course, they have the workers and the gardeners that come in, and they had 4 gardeners out, and they were getting ready to dig up the rose garden. And all of a sudden, there's a door with a porch, like a portico, right on the edge, right that overlooks the rose garden. The doors flew open, and they looked up, and they thought that they were going to have someone coming out. The doors flew open. Nobody was there. And they looked down, and they continued doing what they were doing. And then they looked back up, and this very angry woman with marabou feathers in her hair and dressed to the nines in a period long ago
Goodness.
came
Yes.
and yelled at them and told them, "You're not moving those roses." And they ran off and they quit their job, and that rose garden is still there today because Dolly doesn't want it moved. How about that?
That's fantastic. I have seen an artist's impression of her, and she looked to be a very beautiful woman, actually. But
Yeah.
a very brave woman, because I believe she was the last person to leave the White House.
She was.
And it was her that actually removed the painting, whilst her husband had left some time before. And she must have been the very, very last person to leave the building.
Yeah, they had to make her. Yeah.
Before the British Army arrived. Yeah.
Isn't that amazing? You can still see the scorch prints. Of course, now the White House has been, moved and redone. I believe it was
Yes.
Eisenhower that went in, and there's not a lot of it left that was there then.
From that period of time, yeah.
Correct. Yeah, but you can still see the scorch marks. I believe it's in the blue room. I can't remember 100%, but I think it's in the blue room. They left the scorch marks there just to remember the fire that took on. But she was, she was headstrong in life and she was headstrong in death, because I wouldn't want to move one of those rose bushes.
No, I think she's fabulous, really, and
Yeah.
a local hero, a real local hero.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't know that. That's really cool, Simon. That's very cool. So listen, hon, before I let you go, this has been absolutely amazing, and this is not
Thank
going to
you,
be
dear.
the last time. My listeners love you
No.
so much, and you're going to come back again and again and again. But I definitely want to give you all the props that I possibly can. Now, you have a wonderful YouTube channel. If they want to get more stories and listen to your lovely voice, it is called Ghostly Tales of the Unexplained, and it is on YouTube channel. And I believe that comes through the Paranormal UK radio, does it not?
Yes, that's quite correct. But I also have on YouTube Tales from the Grave. There's quite a few stories on there, Tales from the Grave, and they've been quite popular.
Yes, they're wonderful.
I'm going to do a few more this year.
That's wonderful.
It'd be lovely to nip over and do some really good ones from your part of the world as well, because I disagree with what you said before, Cisco. I think America's got some fabulous stories and some fabulous history, and I just love the days of the early pioneers. The days of the Pilgrim Fathers and Salem, Massachusetts. Well, that's a great story in itself, isn't it? Really,
Yes.
but there were some incredibly brave characters that have gone down in American history, and when you look at, I was brought up on Western films, and when you look at Custer's Last Stand, it doesn't get more romantic, does it? Really?
Oh.
It doesn't get more romantic. The cavalry surrounded by the Indians there. I mean, it's really swashbuckling stuff. That.
It is indeed, and I've looked a lot into that. Custer's Last Stand, and the everything that happened, and that's a very haunted area as well. I don't know whether Custer himself, but there has been many Native American ghosts that are seen there, and it's said that when you stand there, you can hear them coming over the hill.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure. Because it would have been a very traumatic battle. But these guys, of course, were surrounded, weren't they? Completely surrounded, and they knew that no prisoners would be taken.
Right.
And so they'd literally fight to the very, very death. Those lads. But I also find the Battle of the Alamo quite fantastic as well, because that was another serious, determined stand, wasn't it?
It absolutely was.
People like Davy Crockett and Bowie. They're all American heroes, really, aren't they?
Yes, they are, and it's amazing to, you hear each individual story of the intestinal fortitude of someone making a stand, whether it's a British soldier or an American soldier or, people in the frontier or Native American. It's just amazing what the human body and the human mind can put themselves to do.
Very much so.
It is quite amazing. And look, too, of all of the people looking for new hope and new land and freedom and a new start to coming from your part over here. Coming through Ellis Island, and I live right on the beach, and I know you and I have talked about many a time. I was telling you about moon cursors. They're called moon cursors and wreckers, and what they used to do. Do you remember me telling you what they used to do was, and it happened all up and down the coast, of course. In some cases, they would tie a lantern to a donkey's tail and have it walk back and forth on a night that was not lit by the moon, and that's why they were called moon cursors, because they cursed the moon because they couldn't do it when the moon was bright. But on a foggy night or something like that, they would absolutely fool the ships that were coming through. And a lot of times these ships came through, they were filled with immigrants headed toward New York to go to Ellis Island. Now, if you were headed toward a new land, you would take everything with you that you had that you could carry. And a lot of times they would put their money or jewelry or whatever in the hems of their clothes. So when these ships would see this light and be fooled at where the land was, they would usually wreck on the rocks. And once the ship started to go down, everybody would jump off and try to swim for shore. And it's a little harder than people imagine jumping from that height into the water. It crushes bones. It takes a lot out of you. Yeah, it's horrible. And by the time they would fight to shore, those that survived, they were met by these moon cursors, and they were basically land pirates. And they would knock them over the head and then go through their clothes. Now, I can tell you, to this day, and I didn't know this when I was a young teenager, and we used to have bonfires on the beach, and sometimes we would sleep out on the beach. I didn't hear it then, I heard it after, that I've met a few people that have fallen asleep on the beach and been rolled over in the night only to see a ghost of a moon cursor going through their clothes. And I cannot imagine the horror.
Yes.
Is that amazing?
Would be a real shock. Cisco, just very, very quickly, you mentioned you've been in the armed forces.
Yes.
For a while. And did you volunteer for that?
I did indeed. I was in the United States Army, and I was in transportation. I was a truck driver.
Wow. And did they teach you to drive the truck? Did you have to get a special license for the truck?
Yes, they did. They start from the very beginning. They start teaching you, because a lot of people have never, driven a clutch or anything like that. So they have to start you from the very beginning with Jeeps. And then they start right up from there. And I'll tell you something, there's not too much like an Army Jeep, boy. Those things can take some stuff. But then they move you all the way up. You learn how to drive everything from a bus to what we called the General. And that was a semi-tractor trailer. And that's what I drove.
Marvelous, yeah. That sounds, really interesting, really. And so the army was probably a big help in terms of getting work as well, because those skills are quite rare, aren't they?
Yeah, you have to get a special license when you go in. You've got your military license, and then you're cleared to drive everything that they have. And then when you come out, it's very easy for you to get your what we call a CDL, so you can be a truck driver out here.
Oh yes, as a civilian.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. So
Marvelous.
It was quite an amazing experience. Many a time, you meet people that you go through things that you don't go through with your own family. You become very close very fast. It's quite amazing, the soldiers.
Yeah, Cisco, I should imagine that the basic training was probably very tough. It must have been really tough. It
was. I loved every minute of it. I'm one of those crazy people. Isn't that crazy?
I should imagine you'd have to make your bed every day and probably make a bed pack, and probably even polish your boots and things.
Oh yeah, everything had to be what we call squared away. That's for sure.
Squared away, yes.
Yeah. They teach you to do more in the morning. Like you do more before 5 a.m. than most people do all day.
I'm sure. It must be very, very tough. But I should imagine that discipline was probably very important, really.
Oh, yeah. I started out my first 2 weeks, I wound up being a squad leader, and then I became a platoon guide. And then I went to what we call advanced individual training, where you start losing, once you get through the basics, you go to start training on your actual job. And I wound up going to Fort Dix. I don't know how I wound up going to basic training that's in New Jersey, but I did. And I wound up going there for basic, and I wound up going for my AIT. And I can tell you that it was absolutely amazing. For me, it was I wanted it badly, so I enjoyed it a lot. I mean, there's some very hard times. I mean, I think the hardest thing was just trying to stay awake on fire guard when you're up all night and you've been doing stuff all day. It was just staying awake on guard duty or standing in the cold. You're standing in the cold for 8 hours, just guarding, a shack or something like that. But everything that you do is very important, And the funny thing was, Simon, you're going to get a kick out of this. I had no idea because I lost my father at a very young age. And I just felt so at home, in the Army. I loved the camaraderie. I loved the discipline. I liked everything about it at the time. And when I got out, I stayed in Alabama, and I was far away from my family. And my sister was going through some old paperwork. And like I said, I lost my dad at a very young age, and I knew some about him, but not a lot. And his current wife, when he passed in Greece, and sent a bunch of paperwork to my other sister. And she sent me a little packet of it. And she said, I thought you might be interested in this. And I opened it up and I read it, and it was his military records. Now, my dad had fought in North Africa. He was in World War II. So he was in Italy and North Africa and a couple other places. And I knew, I knew that, but I didn't know much I didn't know what kind of job he had or whatever. And I'm reading through his military records, and he had gone, I kid you not, God is my witness, he went to the same place for basic training, Fort Dix. He was in the same billets that I was in basic training.
My goodness. He
was in the same MOS, which is, your military job. He was a truck driver. I had no idea. He went to the same advanced individual training I went to at Fort Dix, and he was in the same building, Alpha 25.
My goodness, that really is amazing, isn't it, really?
It shocked me. I had no idea. Can you imagine? What are the chances, Simon?
Incredible, Cisco. Was he involved in the D-Day landings?
I don't think he was. I'm not 100% sure where he was at the time. I know he would spend an awful lot of time in North Africa. I think he came into Italy after that, though.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, but what an amazing...
It's an incredible coincidence, that really, isn't it? It's absolutely amazing, really.
Yeah, it is. You can't make stuff like that up. I mean, I had no idea he was even a truck driver.
No, that's right. Incredible. Cisco, would you meet people from all over the United States, or would people be just recruited from a certain area?
Oh, all over. You're basically set in the basic training that, we had people from all over the United States. We had them from Alaska, even, and Hawaii, and all over. I think they base it on, when you're signed up, what's open, and they try to get that soldier as close to their advanced individual training as well, that they're going to be. So they don't have to spend a lot on transportation, I guess. That's the way it works. I'm not 100% sure. But, it was quite something. It was a long time ago.
Really, yeah.
Well, it was a long time ago, but I can tell you right now, Simon, I learned things there that I use every day,
Marvelous. Yeah. Cisco, people living, shall we say, in Kentucky and Texas and Louisiana, their accents are totally different to the north, aren't they?
Yes.
And it's a very, very strong accent, isn't it, really?
Yes. And the odd thing about that is I was raised in New Jersey. And when I got out of the Army, I spent an awful lot of time in Alabama. And now I have kind of a Jersey Southern accent, which is very odd.
There's a big difference, isn't it? A real big difference in the accent, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And it's amazing how you can just go across states and have that. But I'm sure you have that there as well, because I know that you'll have some people that speak a very, I don't want to say Cockney accent, but you can absolutely tell the difference of the regions.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Southern and northern, there is a big difference, really, yeah. And of course the Welsh, they have their own accent in Wales. And of course the Irish do as well, of course. And the Scots, well, I think the Scots are known throughout the world, aren't they, for their unusual accent. Really.
Absolutely. And that's where my dad was from. His family was from there. Yeah,
Of course,
from Scotland. Yeah,
Murdoch.
Murdoch.
Murdoch is it's a very Scottish name, isn't it?
Isn't it though? Yeah. My brother
Very
likes
much.
to go there. He says he gets treated almost like royalty when he goes there.
Oh,
And
I'm
I'm like,
sure. I'm sure he would do. Yeah, he would do with a name like that. He would do. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. We have a beautiful kilts, beautiful black wash print, and I've seen the coat of arms, and it's amazing. It's just amazing how we all seem so very far away, but we're all very close and connected.
Yes.
Isn't that
Very
amazing?
much so, Cisco.
Yes.
I think it's great. I think it's great, really.
It is. And it's so good that we have this technology that we can just reach so far across the pond and talk to
Incredible.
wonderful people like you, Simon. I can't thank you enough for being here, my love.
The pleasure is all mine. I'm just delighted that Facebook seems just as good as Skype, really.
Yes, it doesn't it though. So now we know we have a way through, and
It's not nice and clear. Nice and clear.
it is indeed. And I want to mention your book one more time, Ghostly Tales of the Unexpected. And you have another
Unexpected,
one.
yes.
You have another one you're
I'm-
working.
Yes, I'm 3/4 of the way through that one, actually. But with that second book, what I've done is I've used a lot of imagination. The first book was all based on true stories. But the second one, I've brought different characters in and put a lot of imagination into it, really. And hopefully that'll do quite well.
That's wonderful. Well, I know my listeners are very interested in it, and I can't thank you enough, love. I'm sure it's getting late there, and I look forward to talking to you again.
I'm going to enjoy a nice cold beer, Cisco, but it's been a real pleasure talking to you, and thank you for kindly contacting me.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you what, as soon as possible, if I can't get over there, and we'll get you over here, and I'll buy you a cold beer.
I would love to have a real nice drink in your part of the world, my dear. Thank you.
Absolutely. Blessings, love.
Thank you.
I cannot thank Simon enough. Lovely, lovely ghost stories from London. You got a couple here from America, and even a few surprise ones about Dolly Madison and the Rose Garden, and a little bit about the military. So that was a surprise. I cannot thank Simon enough for coming here. Please check out the YouTube channel, and it's the Ghostly Tales of the Unexpected and Ghostly Tales of the Unexplained, his book. It's a wonderful book, and hopefully his second one will be out soon, and we'll have him back on to talk about that, because it's always a spooky, delightful time when Simon Entwistle comes to this side of the gate, and I cannot thank him enough. He is a dear friend.
you.